The crisp winter wind whipped through the streets of New York City, cutting through the layers of clothing worn by a homeless man huddled on the sidewalk. His name was Michael, and he had been living on the streets for the past 2 years, ever since losing his job and his small apartment. With no family or friends to turn to, Michael had become just another faceless statistic in the growing population of the city's homeless. As Michael shivered and pulled his tattered coat tighter around himself, he noticed a familiar figure approaching in the distance. It was none other than Donald Trump, the larger-than-life real estate mogul and reality TV star who had become a household name. Michael's heart raced, wondering if the billionaire would simply pass him by, as so many others had done. To Michael's surprise, Trump slowed his pace and approached the homeless man, his brow furrowed with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Hey there, friend," Trump said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "You look like you could use a warm meal and a place to stay. Why don't you come with me?" Michael stared at the man in disbelief, unsure if this was some kind of prank or if Trump was truly offering him assistance. The emotional stakes were high, as Michael had long since given up hope of ever finding a way off the streets. Could this be the turning point he had been praying for? As Trump extended his hand, Michael hesitated, his eyes searching the billionaire's face for any hint of deception. But all he saw was a sincere desire to help, a rare glimpse of compassion from a man known for his brash and unapologetic demeanor. Tentatively, Michael took Trump's hand, and the two men set off, the future uncertain but the promise of a new beginning hanging in the air. As they walked, the bustling city served as a backdrop to their unlikely friendship. Trump spoke about his plans for the city, his voice animated with passion. Michael listened, captivated by the man's charisma, but also wary of the world beyond the moment. This was a chance encounter that could change everything, but Michael couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye. In the heart of Manhattan, where skyscrapers loomed like giants, the two men embarked on a journey that would challenge perceptions and reveal hidden truths about compassion and humanity. As they turned the corner, Michael felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. This was just the beginning of an unexpected journey, one that would intertwine their lives in ways neither could have imagined. End Solomon. Now let's put this under a microscope. As Michael and Trump walked through the bustling streets of Manhattan, the air buzzed with excitement and the promise of change. Michael had never been so close to someone so powerful, and yet, as they navigated the crowded sidewalks, he felt a strange mix of hope and trepidation. Just as he began to envision a future away from the streets, a sudden commotion erupted nearby, shattering the fragile peace he had begun to feel. A loud crash echoed through the air, drawing the attention of passers-by. Michael turned to see a group of protesters gathered around a large, luxury SUV that had just come to a screeching halt. The crowd was shouting, their voices rising in anger and frustration. Signs reading "Housing for All" and "End Homelessness Now" waved wildly in the air, and Michael's heart sank as he recognized the familiar faces of those he had shared his struggles with on the streets. What's going on?" Trump asked, his expression shifting from concern to intrigue. I think it's a protest," Michael replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The tension in the air was palpable, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. He could feel a knot forming in his stomach as he took in the scene unfolding before them. Suddenly, a woman at the front of the crowd stepped forward, her face flushed with emotion. "You can't ignore us any longer. We're tired of being invisible," she shouted, her voice ringing out with fierce determination. "We're asking for help, and we won't back down until we get it." As if on cue, a commotion erupted from the SUV. The door swung open, and a well-dressed man stepped out, flanked by security personnel. It was a high-profile city official known for his controversial policies regarding homelessness. The moment he appeared, the crowd erupted in cheers and jeers. The mix of anger and hope. "Get back in your car," someone shouted. "You're the reason we're out here." "Hey, Michael felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was the world he had been trying to escape, a chaotic struggle for recognition and survival. But as he watched the protests unfold, he couldn't help but feel an unfamiliar surge of courage rising within him. This was a chance to be heard, a chance to stand up for himself and others like him. Trump, however, seemed unfazed by the escalating situation. He stepped forward, his voice booming over the crowd. "I understand your frustrations, but this isn't the way to get results. We need to work together, not against each other." But the crowd was in no mood for diplomacy. They shouted back, their voices rising in a cacophony of anger and desperation. Michael watched as the official tried to speak, but the protesters drowned him out, their cries for help echoing through the streets. Suddenly, chaos erupted. A protester lunged forward, attempting to block the official's path. Security rushed in, shoving the man back and creating a physical barrier between the protesters and the official. The crowd surged, pushing and shoving, and for a moment, Michael felt a wave of panic wash over him. He had seen violence erupt before, and he didn't want to be caught in the middle of it. "Michael, we need to get out of here," Trump urged, grabbing Michael's arm. But Michael hesitated, torn between the safety Trump offered and the urge to join the fight for his own dignity and the dignity of others. But he stuck around anyway. "This is my life," Michael shouted back, his voice rising above the chaos. "These are my people." In that moment, Michael felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. He had spent too long feeling invisible, too long accepting the handouts offered by those who didn't understand his struggle. He needed to take a stand, not just for himself, but for every person who felt forgotten and marginalized. Trump's grip tightened on Michael's arm. "You can't change the world in one day. Let's find a safer place to talk about this." But Michael pulled away, feeling a newfound strength surge through him. He stepped forward into the crowd, the energy electrifying. "We deserve better. We need housing, support, and a chance to rebuild our lives," he shouted, his voice filled with passion. The crowd turned to look at him, their anger momentarily subsiding as they recognized a fellow warrior in the fight for their rights. In that instant, Michael felt the collective power of those around him, the shared experiences, binding them together in a common cause. However, the official security team was on high alert, and the tension escalated once more. The chaos returned as officers began to push back against the protesters, shouting orders to disperse the crowd. Michael's heart raced as he realized the danger was escalating. That's when he heard a low-picating noise. "One of the cops was close," he said. "We're talking 10 yards away." In the midst of the turmoil, Trump stood back, watching the scene unfold with a mix of concern and intrigue. He had entered a world that was foreign to him, a world where emotions ran high and the stakes were life-changing. Michael, now fully immersed in the moment, felt a sense of purpose igniting within him, pushing him to forge ahead despite the chaos surrounding him. But just as the protests intensified, a loud bang suddenly echoed, freezing the crowd in shock. A firecracker. Or perhaps something worse. The moment hung heavy in the air, and Michael's heart dropped as he realized the urgency of the moment. The crowd was no longer just protesting for their rights. They were now fighting for their lives. As chaos erupted around them, Michael's world turned upside down, and he knew that everything was about to change forever. The inciting incident had arrived, disrupting his fragile hope and forcing him to confront the harsh realities of the life he had fought so hard to escape. In the days following the chaotic protests, Michael found himself navigating a treacherous new reality. The incident had ignited a fire within him, but as the dust settled, he realized that the challenges ahead were far greater than he had anticipated. The city that had once felt indifferent now seemed hostile, and each day was a battle against not only his circumstances, but also his own doubts. The media coverage of the protests had sparked a citywide debate, and amidst the uproar, Michael sensed the stakes rising. He couldn't shake the feeling that the world was watching him now, but the attention was a double-edged sword. While it brought awareness to the plight of the homeless, it also attracted unwanted scrutiny. Questions flooded his mind. Was he ready to be a voice for change? Would he be able to withstand the pressure? Days turned into weeks, and the cold winter air nipped at his skin as he huddled in his usual spot, a small alcove near a bustling subway entrance. The once familiar sounds of the city now felt like a cacophony of judgment and expectation. Every time he saw a news report or a social media post about the protest, a knot tightened in his stomach. He had spoken out, but at what cost? One afternoon, as he sat wrapped in his worn blanket, a familiar face approached him. It was Jenna, a fellow homeless woman he had known for years. Her eyes were filled with a mix of concern and admiration. "Michael, I saw you out there. You were incredible," she exclaimed, though her voice carried an undercurrent of worry. For the dark monster knew they were our own. "I just want to get better." "Just thanks, Jenna, but it didn't change anything," he replied, looking away. He felt the weight of failure pressing down on him. "Nothing really changes for us." Not yet," she said, her tone firm. "But you have to keep fighting. You've got people listening now." Michael sighed, knowing she was right, but the fear of public scrutiny loomed over him. What if he failed to live up to the expectations? What if his voice wasn't strong enough? As days passed, Michael decided to attend meetings organized by local advocacy groups seeking to address homelessness. It was a step forward, but with each meeting, he felt himself slipping further into a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He was both inspired by the stories of resilience he heard and terrified by the overwhelming challenges that lay ahead. One evening, after a particularly heated discussion about potential solutions, Michael found himself in a corner, grappling with his thoughts. The group had debated passionately about the need for immediate shelter options, but as the voices clamored around him, he felt disconnected, lost in his own mind. The idealism of the others clashed with his own experiences of rejection and despair. "Michael, are you okay?" A voice broke through his thoughts. It was Sam, a former social worker turned advocate, who had taken a keen interest in Michael's journey. "You seem a bit distant." "I want to help, but I don't know how," Michael admitted, frustration mingling with vulnerability. "Every time I try to speak up, I just feel inadequate." Sam nodded, his expression empathetic. "It's normal to feel that way, especially when you're trying to make a difference. But remember, your story matters. Sharing it can inspire others." As Michael listened, he felt a flicker of hope ignite. Perhaps he could channel his experiences into something meaningful. But that spark was quickly snuffed out when he faced another reality. The city's government was planning to clear out several encampments, including the one where he and Jenna often slept. The announcement came like a punch to the gut. Michael felt his heart race as he listened to the news on a nearby television. The authorities were claiming it was for public safety, but Michael knew the truth. It was a convenient way to erase the problem rather than solve it. "We need to fight back," Jenna urged, her eyes ablaze with determination. "We can't let them push us out like this," she cut off, gasping as if she just realized it too. "We didn't go to school for this." Michael felt torn. He wanted to stand with her and the others, but the fear of confrontation gripped him. Memories of being dismissed and dehumanized flooded his mind. What if this protest ended badly like the last one? What if he failed again? On top of the rejection, however, he also knew that doing nothing meant losing everything he had fought for. The pressure mounted as the date for the eviction drew closer. Michael found himself pacing the streets, wrestling with his internal conflict. Was he a coward for hesitating, or was he wise for choosing his battles carefully? In an attempt to find clarity, he sought refuge in the local library, a sanctuary where he could escape the harshness of reality. There, he immersed himself in books about activism and social movements. As he read the stories of others who had fought against the odds, he began to understand that failure was a part of the journey. The more he read, the more he realized that each of these activists had encountered moments of doubt and fear, moments just like his. Yet, despite the knowledge he gained, the clock was ticking and the eviction loomed closer. On the eve of the proposed clearing of the encampments, Michael found himself at a crossroads. He attended another meeting, but this time he felt a shift within himself. The voices around him were filled with urgency, and he could sense the determination in the air. I can't just sit back anymore, he thought, his resolve hardening. He stood up, his heart pounding, and declared, "We need to organize a protest. We can't let them erase us without a fight." The room erupted in cheers, and for the first time, Michael felt a sense of belonging. As plans were made, he found himself stepping into a leadership role, guiding others who shared his passion for change. But with that role came the weight of responsibility, and the internal conflict flared anew. What if he led them into danger? What if his efforts fell flat? As the day of the protest arrived, the streets were alive with energy. Banners were raised, voices united in a powerful chorus demanding recognition and respect. Michael stood at the front, his heart racing as he looked out at the crowd. He felt a rush of adrenaline, but the fear still lingered. What if he faltered? As he began to speak, the words flowed from him, fueled by the passion he had kept bottled up for so long. "We are not invisible. We deserve to be heard." The crowd roared in response, and for a moment, everything felt right. But then, as the protest continued, a heavy police presence began to form at the edges of the crowd. Tension crackled in the air, and the realization settled in. This could turn ugly. Suddenly, a loud voice boomed over the crowd. "Disperse now or face arrest." The police began to advance, and panic rippled through the protesters. Michael's heart raced, and the doubts that had plagued him returned with a vengeance. What if he had made a mistake? Well, what if this was the end? As chaos erupted around him, Michael felt a surge of panic. He had fought so hard to stand up for his community, but now it seemed like everything was unraveling. People began to scatter, and the once ununited front started to crumble. He searched for Jenna, his heart pounding in his chest. "Stay together," he shouted, trying to rally the remaining protesters, but the fear was palpable. The reality of their situation hit him hard. They were risking everything. And for what? His mind raced with doubt, and he felt the weight of his decisions crashing down around him. In that moment of chaos, Michael faced a choice: succumb to the fear and confusion, or take a stand for himself and his community. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, he made a decision. He would not let his fear dictate his actions. He turned to face the advancing police, feeling a mix of defiance and vulnerability. As the clash between the protesters and the police intensified, Michael realized that this was more than just a protest. It was a fight for identity, dignity, and humanity. The stakes had never been higher, and he knew he had to confront not only the external challenges, but also the internal ones that had kept him from fully embracing his potential. Each moment was a struggle filled with uncertainty and fear, but he felt a determination rising within him. He was no longer just a homeless man. He was a voice for change, and he would fight for those who felt voiceless. As he stood his ground, he understood that this journey was far from over, and with every challenge, he could either grow stronger or falter. The chaos of the protest engulfed Michael, the cacophony of shouts and sirens swirling around him like a tempest. As he stood face to face with the police officer, a moment of clarity washed over him. The officer's furious glare pierced through the noise, but it was the fear in the eyes of those behind him that struck a deeper chord within. Suddenly, the weight of responsibility pressed down upon his shoulders, heavier than he had ever imagined. What if this was not just about me? What if my choices could change everything for them? The thought echoed in his mind, reverberating like a drumbeat. In that instant, he realized that this protest was not merely a fight for housing rights. It was a fight for dignity, for humanity, and for a community that had been silenced for far too long. Michael's heart raced with the realization that his previous approach, angry, defensive, and reactive, would not suffice. He had always believed that standing his ground and shouting louder than the opposition would somehow win the day. But as the moment stretched, he understood that true leadership required more than just courage. It required strategy and vision. Now, let's be honest, this is kind of the same thing that Elon Musk struggled with when facing making his biggest investment to date. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. What if he could turn this moment of confrontation into an opportunity for dialogue? What if, instead of escalating the conflict, he could break through the wall of hostility and reach the human behind the badge? "Wait!" Michael shouted, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. The crowd quieted momentarily, surprised by his unexpected call for calm. "Let's not fight! We're not your enemies." He directed his voice towards the officer, who hesitated, taken aback by this sudden shift in the approach. The officer's brow furrowed, confusion evident on his face. Michael seized the moment, stepping forward, his heart pounding but his resolve solid. "We're here to be heard. We're fighting for our rights, not for violence. We want to talk, to find a way to coexist without fear." The crowd watched in anticipation, their eyes shifting between Michael and the officer. For Michael, it felt as if the world had slowed down. The stakes were higher than ever. He was risking everything: his safety, the momentum of the protest, and the trust of those who had rallied behind him. But something deep within him urged him forward. If he could bridge the gap between them, perhaps they could find common ground. This officer was just a person, likely facing pressures of his own, caught in a system that demanded obedience over compassion. If he could reach that person, maybe he could ignite change. The officer hesitated, glancing back at his line of fellow officers who were ready for confrontation. But then, as if sensing a shift in the air, he lowered his baton slightly, allowing a sliver of humanity to break through his hardened exterior. "You're asking for a dialogue? Here? Now?" he replied, skepticism lacing his tone. "Yes," Michael exclaimed, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Let's talk about what we need. We're not here to cause trouble. We want to be seen and heard. We want to work together to find solutions. We're tired of being ignored." The crowd behind him began to murmur, their fear slowly transforming into curiosity. Could this really be happening? Was Michael's bold move opening a door to dialogue instead of destruction? The officer looked back at his colleagues who were unsure of how to respond. Michael felt the tension in the air shift, a palpable sense of hope rising among the protesters. They were desperate for this moment to succeed, for their voices to be acknowledged. But just as the officer seemed to consider the possibility, a loud voice shouted from the back of the crowd, "Don't trust them. They're just trying to silence us." The words cut through the fragile atmosphere like a knife, and the officer's expression hardened again. Michael felt a pang of frustration. Fear and mistrust could easily derail everything he had worked for in that moment. He needed to regain control, to reframe the narrative. "Please," he urged, turning back to the crowd. "I understand your anger. I feel it too. But if we give in to our fears, we'll never be able to change the system. We need to show them we're serious about peace and progress." The crowd began to nod, their expressions shifting from anger to contemplation. They were beginning to see the potential in Michael's bold choice. Yet the uncertainty still loomed. Michael knew he had to dig deeper, to confront not only the officer, but also the doubts within the hearts of those gathered. "Let's take a moment," he continued, his voice steady and calm. "Think about why we're here. Think about the lives that depend on us. This isn't just about one protest or one man's struggle. This is about our community, our future, and the right to live with dignity. If we can't come together now, when will we?" "Is this fun?" I asked, some of my favorite. As he spoke, Michael felt a shift within himself. The anger that had fueled his past actions began to dissipate, replaced by a profound sense of purpose. This was not merely about fighting against the system, it was about creating a new one, one built on understanding and collaboration. Um, the officer's expression softened and he took a step back, lowering his baton fully. I hear you, he said, his voice surprisingly calm. But this is a complicated situation. You must understand. We're also under pressure to maintain order. Michael nodded, his heart racing with the realization that they were beginning to connect. I know it's complicated, but we can work together to find a solution that respects both our rights and your responsibilities. We don't want violence. We want change. The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement, the energy shifting from despair to hope. The realization that they could have a voice in their fight was beginning to take hold. Michael felt the tide turning. He was no longer just standing against the system, but rather stepping into a role that could lead to transformation. In that moment, everything changed. The stakes had been raised, and Michael understood that the true battle lay not in confrontation but in dialogue. He was no longer just a homeless man at a protest. He had become a catalyst for change, a voice for the voiceless, and a bridge between two worlds. As the crowd rallied behind him, their voices rising in support, Michael took a deep breath. This was his moment of revelation, a turning point that would alter the trajectory of their fight. He was ready to face the consequences of his past actions, embracing a new path that would challenge him to lead with empathy, courage, and resolve. He looked back at the officer, who nodded slightly, signaling a willingness to engage. The air was charged with possibility, and Michael knew that they were on the brink of something profound. Together, they could begin to rewrite the narrative, to forge connections that transcended fear and division. The air was thick with tension as Michael stood at the forefront of the protest, the faces of his fellow protesters illuminated by the flickering lights of police sirens. The moment was electric, a charged atmosphere swirling around him, filled with the palpable energy of hope and fear. He felt the weight of the world pressing down on him, a heavy reminder of everything that was at stake. Stand firm, he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. We are here for our rights. We will not be silenced. The crowd echoed his words, a chorus of defiance rising into the night sky. But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. What if this was all for nothing? What if they couldn't hold their ground? Ahead, the police line stood resolute, shields glinting under the streetlights, batons ready. The officer he had spoken to earlier now stood at the front. His expression hardened again, reflecting the tension of the moment. Michael's heart raced as he realized this was it. The final confrontation. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, propelling him into action. Michael? Jenna's voice broke through the noise, pulling him back to the present. She was at his side, her eyes wide with concern. What do we do now? They're getting ready to charge. He turned to her, his mind racing. This was the moment he had been preparing for, yet it felt surreal. We can't back down, he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. We have to show them we mean business, but we need to do it smartly. No violence. Crowds surged behind them, their energy infectious. Michael felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. If they could just hold the line, maybe they could negotiate. Maybe they could turn this confrontation into something more. The police officer raised his baton, signaling for the crowd to disperse. You need to move back, he shouted, his voice booming. This is your last warning. This was the moment. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of the lives that depended on him. He couldn't let fear dictate their fate. We're not going anywhere, he yelled back, raising his megaphone high. You can't silence us. The officer's eyes narrowed and he stepped forward, the tension crackling between them. You're making a mistake, he warned, his voice slow and threatening. You have no idea what you're provoking. Michael's resolve hardened. This was the climax of their struggle, the moment when everything could change, for better or worse. No, you're wrong, he shouted, his voice rising above the din. We're fighting for our lives. We deserve to be heard." As he spoke, the crowd rallied around him. Their fear transformed into a fierce determination. Michael could see the strength in their eyes, the shared commitment to stand together. He felt a surge of energy, a wave of solidarity that pushed him forward. But just as hope flickered, chaos erupted. A protester near the front shouted something, and in an instant, the police line surged forward. A clash of bodies ensued, and the sound of shattering glass echoed through the air. Michael's heart dropped as he watched the scene unfold. This was what he had feared. Violence, chaos, everything they had worked for slipping through their fingers. "Stay together," he screamed, pushing through the crowd, trying to reach the front. "Don't fight back. Stay united." But his voice was drowned out by the chaos, the shouts of fear and anger rising like a tidal wave. In the midst of the turmoil, he spotted a group of officers advancing, their faces set in determination. The officer he had spoken to earlier was now at the forefront, baton raised, ready to strike. This was the moment that would define everything. Michael's heart raced as he felt the weight of the choice before him. Should he retreat and protect himself, or should he confront the officer, risking everything to stand for what he believed in? The internal struggle raged within him, the fear of failure battling against the burning desire for change. "Michael!" Jenna's voice broke through again, desperate and pleading. "What are you doing? We need to go." "No," he shouted, his voice fierce. "We can't back down now, not after everything we fought for." As he stepped forward, he felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. He faced the officer, locking eyes with him, and in that moment, all the noise around them faded away. It was just the two of them. The embodiment of the struggle between the system and the people. "Stop!" Michael shouted, his voice steady as he confronted the officer. "You don't have to do this. We're not your enemies. We just want to be heard." The officer hesitated, his grip on the baton wavering. For a heartbeat, there was silence, the chaos around them pausing as if the world was holding its breath. Michael could see the conflict in the officer's eyes, the flicker of humanity breaking through the hardened facade. Miranda's chest heaved, suddenly tangled and sometimes covered up in grooves and rags and stains that began to tear at him. Without warning, the police enforced the law. "They're not listening. We have to enforce the law." The words snapped the fragile tension, and the officer Michael faced hardened once again. Without warning, the police advanced, batons swinging. Michael's heart raced, and he felt the air thicken with impending violence. This was the point of no return. He had to act, and he had to act now. "Everyone get back," he shouted, pushing Jenna behind him. "Form a line. Protect each other." The crowd responded, instinctively moving closer together, creating a wall of bodies determined to stand firm. But the police weren't backing down. The clash intensified, shouts mixed with the sounds of scuffling feet and the thud of batons striking against shields. Michael's heart thundered in his chest as he fought his way to the front, feeling a surge of protective instinct wash over him. Mike. They had to reach that officer. This was his chance to change the narrative, to turn the tide. "Listen to me," he yelled, pushing through the chaos. "We can do this peacefully. We're not here to fight." As he approached, the officer raised his baton again, ready to strike. In that moment, Michael felt a rush of fear, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of clarity. He couldn't let violence define this moment. "Put the baton down," Michael shouted, his voice a mixture of fear and determination. "We can work this out. You don't have to do this." The brigades all drew near where the officer hesitated, his grip faltering as the words sank in. The crowd behind Michael held their breath, the tension hanging thick in the air. It felt as if the world had come to a standstill, all eyes on the two men locked in a battle of wills. "Do you see us?" Michael continued, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We are human beings. We deserve to be treated with respect." The officer's expression wavered, uncertainty creeping into his eyes. "Stand back!" the officer barked, swinging the baton again, but this time it was aimed at Michael. In an instant, time seemed to slow. Michael felt the rush of adrenaline, the heat of fear, coursing through him, but he stood his ground. "Stop," he shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. "We're here for peace." But the officer didn't have time to think. The moment of hesitation was gone, replaced by instinct. The baton came down, but Michael wasn't backing away. In that split second, he made his choice. He stepped forward, raising his hands to shield himself. He would take the hit, if it meant standing for what he believed in. The crowd gasped collectively, a wave of shock rippling through them. But just as the baton was about to make contact, there was a blinding flash of light as the officer was interrupted by a commanding voice. "Pam, stand down!" A higher-ranking officer stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. "What the hell is going on here?" he whispered. The chaos slowly began to subside, the tension deflating like a balloon punctured by a pin. Michael felt the weight of the moment settle over him, the realization that he had stood his ground against an oppressive force, and in doing so, had rallied the crowd behind him. The officer lowered his baton, glancing at his superior, and for a moment, the two were locked in a silent struggle of authority. Michael felt the energy shift. This was his chance. "This is not about violence," Michael spoke up, his voice steady. "We're here to demand our rights. We want to be heard, not hurt." The crowd echoed his sentiments, their voices rising in a crescendo of unity. Michael could feel the tide turning, the momentum shifting in their favor. The commanding officer looked at Michael, then back at the line of officers, clearly assessing the situation. "Let's hear him out," he said finally, raising his hand to signal the officers to lower their weapons. The chaos of the protest began to dissipate, leaving behind a heavy silence that hung in the air like a thick fog. Michael stood amidst the remnants of the confrontation, the echoes of shouts and clashing bodies fading into a distant memory. His heart still raced, adrenaline coursing through him, but now it was mixed with a profound sense of exhaustion. Around him, the crowd was slowly dispersing, their faces reflecting a blend of emotions: relief, fear, and a newfound sense of purpose. Michael watched as people embraced, tears of joy and disbelief streaming down their cheeks. They had faced the storm together, had stood firm in the face of adversity, and had emerged on the other side, albeit shaken. "Michael," Jenna rushed to his side, her face flushed with excitement. "Did you see what just happened? We actually got them to listen." He nodded, still processing the whirlwind of events. "Yeah, I can't believe it," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But at what cost?" Jenna's expression shifted, a mixture of triumph and concern. "We stood our ground. We showed them we're not going to back down. This is just the beginning." As she spoke, Michael felt a sense of pride bloom within him. They had made a stand, had transformed their anger into something powerful. But beneath that pride lay a deep well of uncertainty. The confrontation may have ended without violence, but the scars of their struggle ran deep. Michael took a step back, leaning against a lamppost, his mind racing. He had faced the police, had stood up to authority, but what did it all mean? The moment they had shared with the officer, the flicker of understanding in his eyes, had given him hope. But that hope came with the weight of responsibility. "Are you okay?" Jenna asked, concern etched on her face. "Are you female?" "Yeah, I need a moment to think," he replied, his gaze drifting towards the empty street where the police had once stood. The shadows of the night seemed to whisper secrets of the past, reminding him of the long journey that had brought him here. As he stood there, memories flooded back, the nights spent on cold sidewalks, the battles fought for scraps of dignity, the faces of those who had suffered in silence. Had he truly made a difference? In the distance, he could hear the murmurs of the remaining protesters, their voices a soothing balm against the chaos of earlier. They were sharing stories, laughing, and planning their next steps. Michael felt a shift within himself, a realization that this was not just about him anymore. It was about all of them. Jenna squeezed his arm, breaking through his thoughts. Michael, you've changed so much. You're a leader now. You brought us together. Michael bridled at the words. Leader, together. He looked at her, searching for the right words. But I didn't do it alone, he admitted. We're all in this together. I couldn't have stood there without all of you. She smiled, her eyes shining with admiration. But you were the one who stepped up. You were brave when it mattered most. Bravery. The word lingered in his mind, swirling with memories of fear and anger. He had always thought of bravery as a fierce confrontation, but now he understood it in a different light. Bravery was vulnerability. It was the willingness to stand for something greater than oneself. As the last remnants of the crowd began to fade, Michael turned his gaze to the horizon. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden hue across the city. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start after a long, dark night. He took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp morning air, and felt the weight of his choices settle within him. He had faced the consequences of his actions, had stood firm in the face of authority, but there was still much work to be done. Let's get to work, he said, determination infusing his voice. We need to organize to plan our next steps. This fight isn't over. Jenna nodded enthusiastically, her smile wide. I'm with you, Michael. We're going to make a real change. As they began to walk towards the remaining group, Michael felt a sense of purpose surge within him. He had been lost for so long, wandering through life without direction. But now, he understood his place in this movement. He was not just a survivor. He was a catalyst for change. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Michael and the other protesters met regularly, strategizing and planning their next moves. They shared stories, experiences, and dreams for a better future. Each meeting brought a renewed sense of hope, the realization that they were not alone in their fight. But amidst the excitement, Michael couldn't shake the lingering doubts. What if their efforts were in vain? What if they faced even greater opposition? The uncertainty loomed like a shadow, but he refused to let it dictate his actions. Instead, he channeled his fear into determination, pushing forward with renewed vigor. He often found himself reflecting on that night, the confrontation, the officer, the moment of connection. As they continued to organize, Michael's leadership began to take shape. He spoke at community meetings, sharing their mission and rallying support from others who had been marginalized. He became a voice for those who had been silenced, a beacon of hope for those who felt lost. With each passing day, he saw the impact of their efforts. More people joined their cause. The movement began to grow. They organized rallies, reached out to local media, and started to gain traction in their fight for housing rights. Looking back, Michael marveled at how far they had come. The struggles, the sacrifices, and the moments of doubt had all led him here, to a place where he felt empowered and connected to something greater than himself. He had transformed from a man fighting for survival into a leader fighting for justice. As the movement gained momentum, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He had faced his fears, challenged authority, and discovered the power of unity. The fight was far from over, but he felt a sense of peace in knowing that he was not alone. In the quiet moments, he still grappled with the weight of his choices, the haunting memories of those who had suffered. But instead of being paralyzed by fear, he used those memories as fuel, a reminder of why they were fighting. As the sun set on another day of organizing, Michael stood outside, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. It was a beautiful sight, a reminder that even after the darkest nights, a new dawn would always come. He closed his eyes, breathing in the cool evening air, and felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. He had found his purpose and his community. Together, they would continue to fight, to stand up for what was right. And there would be more like me. His journey had changed him, reshaped his understanding of himself and the world around him. And as he prepared for the challenges ahead, he knew that he was ready to face them head on, with courage, compassion, and a heart full of hope. As the sun rose higher over the horizon, painting the New York skyline in hues of orange and gold, Michael stood among the remnants of the protest, feeling a profound sense of change wash over him. The morning light felt like a warm embrace, a promise of new beginnings. He had faced his demons, stood up for his beliefs, and found his voice in a world that had often tried to silence him. In the days that followed, the movement gained momentum. They organized rallies, reached out to local media, and garnered support from community leaders. Michael became a symbol of resilience, a beacon for those who had felt marginalized and voiceless. Yet, despite the growing support, a lingering doubt remained. Nestled in the back of his mind, a question he couldn't quite shake. Had they truly made a difference? One evening, after a particularly successful rally, Michael found himself alone in the quiet of his makeshift home. He looked around at the walls adorned with posters and flyers of their efforts. Each piece represented a battle fought, a voice raised, but also a reminder of the long road ahead. He thought about the faces of those who had joined him, the ones who had shared their stories and shed tears of both pain and joy. Could they sustain this momentum? Would it be enough to bring about real change? As he pondered these questions, the weight of his journey settled heavily on his shoulders. He had transformed from a man barely scraping by into a leader. But with that transformation came an immense responsibility. He felt a deep connection to the community he had fought alongside, but he also felt the isolation that often accompanied leadership. An understanding that not everyone would agree with their methods, nor share their vision of change. That night, Michael stepped outside, the crisp air biting at his skin. He gazed up at the stars, each one twinkling like a distant hope. He understood now that change wasn't merely about winning battles. It was about nurturing relationships, fostering understanding, and building a community that could weather the storms together. But even as he embraced this new perspective, a bittersweet truth lingered. Not everyone would find their way into the light. He thought of those who had fallen through the cracks, those who would still face the harsh realities of life on the streets, the ones who might never join the fight for justice. At that moment, Michael made a decision. He would not allow the fight to end with him. He would reach out to those in need, share his experiences, and inspire others to take up the mantle. He would strive to create a network of support, a community where everyone had a seat at the table, regardless of their past. As he walked through the quiet streets, he felt a sense of purpose swell within him. Change was not a single act, it was a continuous journey. And while he couldn't save everyone, he could inspire hope and ignite a spark in others. Ultimately, Chloe believed that it was the same thing. Idris, With renewed determination, Michael headed back to his community, ready to embrace the challenges ahead and carry the torch of hope for those who needed it most. The journey was far from over, but he was no longer afraid. He had found his voice among the crowd, and now he would ensure that every voice was heard. And as the sun continued to rise, illuminating the path ahead, Michael knew that together they could forge a brighter future. The fight for dignity was just beginning.